Don't wanna know what everybody really get me wrong.
With this podcast, you could be superior to a god. You could even beat the devil. It's Super Audio Robo Podcast Z. I'm Ark, that's Nev, and this is the show where we recommend you the finest mecha content for your cultural and artistic development.
And we've already been recommending a lot of good shows, and we got another good show for you today. A really short and digestible show, too.
Another OVA classic of the early 2000s. It's Mazinkaiser, the Mazinger anime that I would say was like the herald of, in a lot of ways, like the modern era of Go Nagai, like anime adaptations.
Yeah, was this the first modern, like, Mazinger-related thing in a while?
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know, if you don't count, like, God Mazinger back in the 80s, which was, like, which had, like, a very short anime, there had been, like, Mazinger had not been on TV since the 70s.
Yeah, and just what a way to bring it back with a bang, I feel.
With quite a bit of history to it as well, but before we even get to, like, how the idea was conceived, we gotta get into our synopsis as far as what Mazinkaiser is about. And it goes like this. In a heated battle against Dr. Hell's forces, Koji Kabuto and Tetsuya Tsurugi are simply overwhelmed by the mechanical beast's might. Koji's defeated and Mazinger falls into Dr. Hell's clutches, but not before retreating in the powder to a secret underground lab holding a terrifying secret. His grandfather, Juzo Kabuto, created a robot even more powerful than either the original Mazinger Z or even Great Mazinger. Before, Koji had the choice of becoming either a god or a devil. Now he is about to surpass the power of gods and devils with Mazinkaiser. Yeah, this is a story that is all about the ultimate form of Mazinger, something that only could have been conceived as you were reaching like the turn of the millennium. You know, decades of just ideas and culture built around like the idea of giant robots, the entire genre, and just needing to go, we got to push this idea farther.
Yeah, it's a fun way to update. I guess you could say it's updating Mazinger to the modern age in a way, right?
Yeah. And that doesn't diminish the fact that the OGs still end up having a place even in the, like, kind of like the more modern eras of anime. It's just this was kind of the one where it has a very interesting story in terms of like its conception. It very much is something that could be seen as sort of like a creative arms race. I think you could describe it as such. So I guess we can get into that, actually describing the prehistory of Mazinkaiser and just where the idea all came from. And like kind of alluded as much between like our overview episode as well as other material, but like the origin of Mazinkaiser, it did not exist with the anime of the same name. It didn't even exist in a manga beforehand. Instead, Mazinkaiser was the product of Go Nagai being commissioned by the developers of Super Robot Wars to create a super robot that was more powerful than any Mazinger to date. The reasoning behind this was that during the 90s, Go Nagai's good friend and the creator of Mazinger's sibling series, you could say, Robo, had come back to like his original work and was working on the then new like manga entries, Robo Go and Shin Robo afterwards. But in those specifically, it introduced the idea of Shin Robo, like the ultimate, newest, most powerful Robo ever seen yet in the entire saga. And it was included as a unit in Super Robot Wars 4. So because of that, there was kind of like a request from Bam Presto to Go Nagai of like, could you maybe give us a Mazinger that could possibly like stand side by side with Shin Getter in terms of power?
I mean, we talk about Super Robot Wars a lot in the show for a good reason. But it's funny, like, just how that game series has just influenced Mazinger in a way by just creating Mazinkaiser in the first place.
And even just the ways where we'll, like, do some very deep fucking cuts at times as far as, like, versions of, like, Mazingers or other classic giant robots that you might not have realized existed in that particular form. So, like, with Mazinkaiser, it made sense, obviously, that like go with this idea. After all, Mazinger and Getter Robo, they're both owned by the same company. Getter Robo is not a Go Nagai property, again, just to get that misconception out of the way, but he does own both of them.
Yep.
It makes sense to give Mazinger that kind of upgrade, especially when you consider there was already the power escalation curve going from original Mazinger to Great Mazinger, and then kind of weird to think of it that way considering its origin is completely different, but Grendizer, being obviously much more potent than either of the previous two. So Mazinkaiser would eventually make its debut as a unit in Super Robot Wars with Super Robot Wars F Final, which was basically like the last of what is typically considered back then the classic era of Super Robot Wars, like the major entry before the Alpha series would begin and start introducing a lot of the more modern elements that a lot of people recognize in Super Robot Wars. Even the initial idea for like how Mazinkaiser came to be in the game's story is also similarly different compared to like how it's how you would expect it to be like in actual Mazinger Z media. The original idea was that Mazinger Z was just going to get exposed to Getter Rays and it would force an evolution on its body and capabilities, which I buy that.
Yeah, sure. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. It made sense in the context of, like a large-scale crossover like that entire series is about, but naturally, like, that backstory would be modified for the actual OVA.
Yeah.
And even a year before it, like, Mazinkaiser was also a unit in the first Alpha game. Even for that game, they did not carry the Getter Ray evolution origin for that. They just kind of settled on the same idea of, actually Mazinkaiser was just this super secret, overpowered prototype that Juzo made in secret.
Yeah, it's just there.
Because of course he would.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it is just in that, the whole Getter Rays explanation is just for that one game. That's it.
Pretty much. Aside from its inclusion prior in Super Robot Wars, the thing that's more significant, and we even opened this episode kind of mentioning it, but like, this was a new Mazinger anime, like the first time Mazinger would have like any sort of like major animation in the early 2000s, like after a considerably long time, like not since the 70s when the Toei anime for, original Mazinger, Great Mazinger, and Grendizer were airing in their prime, basically. And you could say that also ties into a contributing factor of maybe like, well, aside from the fact that Gundam's popularity in the 80s had like basically pushed super robots out of the mainstream for a good long while. But even then, kind of as you were getting near the end of the 70s, there were like some issues with like Go Nagai working with Toei, like legal disputes that came up over the fact that Nagai's name and like Dynamic Pro as like the original creators of Guy King, for people that are familiar with their 70s super robots. It was just like, yes, that is another case of a super robot that was like made originally as a manga, just like Mazinger, had an anime adaptation by Toei, except Toei decided to get a bit greedy and tried to like excise a lot of like the name recognition from like Go Nagai and Dynamic Pro and try to make it seem more like it was entirely Toei's work. And that just led to soured relations between the two parties and just like not really wanting to do anything again.
Yeah, I don't blame Go Nagai for just saying fuck it after that debacle.
Yeah, it did get better, admittedly, like, time eventually did heal those wounds, but it was enough to make it that not only could there not be any sort of like OVA in the 80s even, like not even that got made for Mazinger, and then it was like most of the 90s, nothing for Mazinger as well, even with the Brave series bringing super robots a bit back into the limelight, especially with bringing in like a new audience of children to get interested in the genre.
Yeah.
But I think this is one where you could say it's more to the credit of Getter Robo itself, considering Armageddon in particular, just kind of being like the precursor to what Mazinkaiser would ultimately bring. The late 90s to 2001, when Mazinkaiser would have its first episode, is the turning point for Go Nagai and Dynamic Pro as a whole, like their future anime adaptations adhering much closer to the spirit of their manga source material. Because there's enough differences that you can very easily glean from what the manga were originally like versus what Toei did to like make the to make those stories palatable and actually something you could air on Japanese television.
Yeah, especially Get a Robo. There's a huge difference between the manga and the anime, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, to the point where when we get to talking about some of the Get a Robo entries, like, unsurprisingly, that will be one of the few instances where we talk about a manga instead of explicitly an anime, because it is just that much more important.
And also because I legitimately think the Get a Robo manga is one of the best manga of all time.
I absolutely concur. But there is at least still, just to kind of keep the connection with like those Get a Robo OVAs from like the late 90s a bit in focus. This is something funny that I always have to remind myself, is that apparently Mazinkaiser was not directed by Jun Kawagoe, but the studio that did the animation for those OVAs that he directed, Get a Robo Armageddon and Shin Get a Robo versus Neo Get a Robo, it's the same studio. It's by Brains Base.
Yeah.
And if you've watched Shin Getter versus Neo Getter, you can especially tell the similarities in terms of like the visual style shared between the two.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emphasis on very bold outlines, exaggerated dynamic framing of like the action and the characters. Yeah, it's a different director, but that doesn't change the fact that it still fits the MO of like the studio that had basically started this trend of like, let's actually do justice by the source material of like these dynamic like classic mecha.
Yeah.
And while there's like the adherence to, the manga source material, there's still clearly a love regardless for the 70s original, because various voice actors were brought back, after decades of not actually doing it, aside from like, unless you count audio clips that they had to record in like Super Robot Wars games. but a number of them were brought back. Like, as far as anime would go, this was the last Mazinger anime that would have the very original voice of Koji Kabuto himself. It's a very distinct inflection and voice delivery that you could not mistake for anyone else, really.
Yeah, the original Koji voice, if you have never heard it, is a little more high-pitched than his modern incarnations. It's kind of hard to go back to after getting so used to his modern voice.
Yeah, although it's funny, like, because there was the Mazinger Z Infinity movie, which was very much a send-up to, like, Toei's, like, anime, like, even so much as being said, like, in the same setting. And, like, by that point, they weren't bringing back the original voice actors, but they at least got some people to actually get a lot of the same, like, voice line delivery for like certain characters, like pretty spot on, to the point where I almost didn't realize that, oh wait, no, the Koji in that movie is not done by the same actor. He just does a really good job of getting like the same pitch.
Yeah.
It's at least one where I think it's like, it made sense for like the time that it was made in, I think.
It does, yeah. I think like after this, like Koji's voice actor, I don't know if he retired or if he's just not doing as much voice acting anymore.
He's definitely gotten a lot older, and I don't think it's a matter of like retiring as much from like general work as much as it is just like shifting focus. Because I think he's also done stuff where it's dub acting, dub voiceovers for other stuff. Like, I think he's actually, which is shame because I'm forgetting the name of his voice actor, but I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that he was like the Japanese dub voice for Jackie Chan in like his old movies.
Huh, that's funny. I never knew that one.
Yeah, but I imagine it is just the case where like if he is still doing voice acting work, it's clearly focused on other things at the moment.
This is where I found out he has also he might have just passed away soon. Or he not passed away, or he's just he just retired. He announced his retirement. Sorry, he did not pass away. He just officially retired now.
Okay.
Sorry. I misread the Wikipedia article.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay,
at least I don't have to insert another one of my patented addendums in post I have for the first few episodes.
No. Okay, he's just officially retired on 2023.
Yeah, contrary to popular belief, fact-checking will not ruin this podcast.
No, it won't. It will not ruin it. Wow, that would have been embarrassing.
Yeah. Oof. Oh, how embarrassing for us. Yeah.
Anyways.
Anyway, back on topic. Mazinkaiser. This is also one where, while not the first, it would definitely continue a tradition that we are also very fond of with super robot anime of the modern era, especially Dynamic Pro super robots, and that is music, specifically music performed by the almighty supergroup Jam Project.
Hell yeah.
And this was back when Ichiro Mizuki was on the roster of that group, by the way. You know, back when he was like not just the founding member, but actually performing in the songs as well. And you definitely hear it as well. You can tell this is still in their very early period where you're not getting nearly as much of like duets or harmonies where like everyone is chipping in on like singing the chorus and whatnot. It's like a lot of the different Jam Project songs are still being defined by who's leading the charge on the vocals. Because the opening, Fire Wars, is very clearly being led by the Prince of Anisan himself, Hironobu Kageyama, Mr. Shala Het Shala himself. And then obviously the more mellow ending is sung by Ichiro Mizuki and is quite beautiful.
And let's not forget about the theme of Mazinger, sung by the GOAT himself, Ichiro Mizuki.
Oh yeah, one of the most triumphant heroic themes that you could make for a super robot right there.
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like with that, we got like a good number of like classic, voice actors from the 70s anime reprising their roles. We got this animated by a studio that had already made a name for themselves, like doing OVAs of Get a Robo in a much more tone appropriate to the source material. And then of course we've got music done by one of the most amazing music supergroups ever, with like the headlining vocalist basically I think being the actual best example of like bridging like old and new, because Ichiro Mizuki he was called the King of Anisan for a good reason. He was the OG, and Kageyama was the Prince because he was basically like the clearest successor to that kind of legacy, well, with the name he made for himself like in the like late 80s onward. It is stacked in terms of talent that ended up working on this project.
Oh yeah.
And ultimately the OVA would release across 7 episodes basically for the entirety of a full year, starting from September 25th 2001 to September 25th of the following year. So I imagine that, like, assuming like there weren't any like hiccups with like the production scheduling, that comes out to about like you could basically have like a 2-month gap in between all those episodes,
which is not too bad in OVA terms.
Yeah, like it's not as short of a turnaround as it would probably be compared to other short OVAs, but it's also not as absurdly long as like a number of other legendary OVAs that tend to be uncompromising on their vision and quality.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Giant Robo when it comes to that.
Oh, we will. I'd still say like this show just looks really good even after all this time, so.
It's even good enough to get a follow-up movie like 9 months or so after the fact, basically airing on July 25th, 2003. So yeah, that's basically kind of like the extent of like 1.5 years, almost 2 years of like just Mazinger's back, baby, and he's like in the most powerful form yet. So we might as well get into talking about like the primary mecha of this OVA, which is mostly going to be focused a lot on just one, because a lot of the robots, as you'll find, if you are familiar with Mazinger, many of these are not going to be new.
No, we've kind of talked about them already, but go ahead.
Yeah, but we'll at least mention some important things regarding Mazinger Z and Great Mazinger, because you really only get to see Mazinger Z like in any sort of capacity for the first 2 episodes, as those are basically kind of like the first mini story arc designed to set up, you know, Koji graduating from piloting Mazinger Z to piloting Kaiser. Because it does not, the OG super robot does not last long during the start of this OVA. In fact, to the point where it's like, we said it falls into Dr. Hell's clutches, and that is only after it gets like horribly beaten, just like ganged up on by a bunch of Kikaiju, and after being captured, it is converted into one of Dr. Hell's robots piloted by Baron Ashura, and it's called Ashura Mazinger. And like, you just look at it, what happens to it, and all I could say is, man, poor Majin.
Well, yeah, it doesn't get to last that long.
Like, people that are not as like in tune or like invested in watching giant robots may think it is like somehow silly or corny to feel sad for when like a robot is horribly beaten up, but you don't know what that's like until you've watched Mazinger, man. You just don't.
The poor robot gets beat up so badly.
The only time I think I've ever seen Mazinger Z get it the worst is the movie Mazinger Z versus the Great General of Darkness, because that is Mazinger getting so fucked up to the point you are genuinely worried that Koji is about to die. Again, that was the movie where I posited the question of, did that movie make Japanese children cry in the 70s?
I'm gonna say it made them feel some kind of emotion, is my guess. I'm not sure what, but I'm sure it did.
Yeah, possibly. That said, though, Great Mazinger is in this, and he also does not fare too much better.
No.
Well, we never really got to talk much about Great Mazinger during our overview episode for like kind of obvious reasons, because it was, very focused on like the origins of things. But like Great Mazinger is very much always been framed as like Mazinger Z's big brother, effectively. Never mind the fact that it was probably, well, even though it came in after it, I guess the theory is that it was somehow being developed and worked on by Kenzo before Juzo had finished work on Mazinger Z. Although this is where things, you start to realize it differs quite a bit in terms of backstory for the OVA compared to the Toei anime, because Kenzo Kabuto, Juzo's son and like Koji's father, was nowhere to be found, and not actually the one that made the Great Mazinger that you see in this OVA.
Yeah.
It was instead built by the Photon Power Labs based on blueprints that were left behind by Juzo, which, depending on wording that you get from the translations, may or may not imply that Juzo is actually missing and not just straight up dead. But yeah, Great Mazinger is like, it gets beat up pretty bad as well. Doesn't fall into Dr. Hell's clutches, but it does ultimately get retired at the end of episode 2, except for a surprise comeback. But but you be ready for that. But we got to get to the real star of the OVA.
Oh yeah, the big boy himself.
We got Mazinkaiser, the unbreakable shield to Shin-Getter Robo's unstoppable lance, a version of like kind of like the Chinese paradox that Gona guys actually kind of made mention of, and that's where like I basically have stuck with it, because if Shin-Getter Robo is like raw untapped aggression that cannot be stopped like at any point, Mazinkaiser is just the strongest, most durable robot to ever exist, more durable than regular Super Alloy Z. But even so, it's still able to deal damage in its own right, like plenty, and without a pilot of strong will, it will cause the robot to go berserk. So you gotta have someone as strong-willed like Koji to be able to control it, and doing so will make it like outclass all other Mazingers to date, possibly even Grendizer as well, which might also lead to the theory as to why Grendizer stopped showing up for a good time in anime, probably because they did not want to address the question of, is this robot of alien origin still able to stand up to like the actual peak of human science and technology? It's kind of a mess when you start thinking about it like that.
If you want to know how old I am, I have seen forum arguments where people actually argue about who is stronger, Grendizer or Mazinkaiser, and it is as stupid as you think it is.
Yeah, it's real. It is real rough.
Yeah, it's like, can't they just work together? Can't they just be friends?
But I get it. It's not even a matter of like wanting like it to win a fight. They just don't want it to be like shown up in terms of like its capability, just because this OVA is all about showing just how much like Mazinkaiser just puts over the original Mazinger and even great.
Yeah.
I figure there's a point where it's just like that. It's also a lot more difficult to justify any more use of Grendizer and those characters because of how separate they feel from the original cast. That's a hell of a digression that we'll probably get into more the reasoning of when we talk about actual Grendizer media. But in terms of what Mazinkaiser is capable of, this being a Mazinger class type of super robot, you could expect it to always have, a lot of the similar armaments as its predecessors, just under different names. Some of them are the same names, like Photon Beam, but that's expected. Like Photon Beam is always going to be like not the most powerful, but like it gets the job done when it's used well.
Yeah.
But then you got like these super OP versions of classic moves, like the Rust Tornado, successor to the Rust Hurricane, in which it's like, it's not just Mazinkaiser blowing out like a rust-filled mist or anything like that. It is like, no, it is shooting out tornadoes from its mouth guard. Then you obviously got the Turbo Smasher Punch, which is just the coolest fucking name for a rocket punch if I ever heard one.
It's one of my favorites.
It and Broken Magnum, I think, are tied for me, if I'm being honest.
Broken Magnum is good too.
It's real good. You got Fire Blaster as your breast fire equivalent. Other moves that I put down on here that I realize are actually, they're more honestly seen in like other media and the movies. Stuff like Giganto Missile, which is the successor to Missile Punch, the weird move I had described where it just shoots a missile out of its belly button or just the abdomen in general.
Yeah, it just looks weird.
I get it. Getter Robo had Getter Beam shoot out of the same orifice, but like I don't know if it works nearly as well in Mazinger's case.
Had a lot more limp, I think.
There's also Glacial Beam, which is just kind of like a evolution of like the rare times that Mazinger ever used like an ice-based power of shooting like a freezing ray from like its horn antennas that come out of the side, which again, kind of like in the case of like Mazinkaiser, how those antennas look, they're obviously more horn-like. You know, they aren't just spikes sticking out of the side. They definitely add to, like, the aesthetic of how slim and aerodynamic Mazinkaiser looks compared to any previous Mazinger. The fact that it's Mazinkaiser, like, it's using the word Kaiser to describe it is like, yeah, that is the best word that you could possibly use to describe the king of the super robots.
It's very appropriate.
And also, we cannot forget, if you got a Mazinger, you gotta have a Scrander.
Oh yeah,
you gotta have something that gives it wings, and you get the Kaiser Scrander.
The coolest Scrander IMO.
Yeah, we're both in agreement on that. Yeah, it's sick as hell. Like just a X-shaped kind of like formation with like the wings that are attached to it. Like makes for a very, very cool silhouette when it combines with Kaiser. But that's really just like the abilities when it comes to, you know, what OG Mazinger Z had. These kind of, I would say, overlap more with what Great Mazinger had. And that is Mazinkaiser's got some fucking swords.
Yeah, it does. The Kaiser blades.
And when you watch the movie, it has the addition of the shoulder slicers in which it pulls out two blades, like one from each of its shoulder pauldrons. With a robot that has always had like inherent like medieval knight and king motifs in its design. Yeah, it makes sense that it would be able to pull out like a medieval ass broadsword. Like that is the perfect thing to complete the arsenal that Mazinkaiser has.
Yeah.
On top of the fact that its alloy is so strong, it emphasizes more than I think even the original manga or anime for Mazinger Z did. Just the idea that when Koji is piloting Mazinger, he is invincible.
Yeah.
You feel the invincibility of Mazinkaiser way more than Z ever had.
Yeah. Also, like, it has an extra attack, but this is an attack you only see in the Super Robot Wars game, and it's the Kaiser Nova.
Oh, yes!
It's basically when just Mazinkaiser just goes full power, full photon energy, looks all, like, dark and more, I wouldn't say evil, but definitely a lot more intimidating. It just beats the shit out of a robot and blasts it with a huge, like, energy. It's just like a giant energy blast.
Oh, yeah, I've nearly forgotten about the one. Yeah, that attack is sick.
You don't see it in the OVA, but it's like I said, it's only a Super Robot War thing.
Yeah, it definitely shows, again, as we described, Kaiser's origins are very much like ode to Super Robot Wars. And like as time goes on and like Mazinger continues to be represented in there, ideas that Ben Presto comes up with, or BB Studio these days, since they had merged, you know, like quite a while ago, like are just going to keep coming up with new cool things to do with Mazinger that may or may not end up feeding back into new manga or anime properties. Yeah. It's like it's a cool synergy that you really don't see happen a lot with the other giant robot franchises that typically get featured in Super Robot Wars.
It feels like they have a lot more freedom with Mazinger and all its related properties in a way in those games.
Yeah, they definitely do. There's a lot of tacit approval from Go Nagai himself, you can tell.
Yeah.
That said, though, like we also got, you know, our primary characters. An important thing to note is that because this is still dealing with like a lot of the same characters that we had already described in our overview episode, you know, like they exist in the OVA. I am not going to remind you of who Koji and Sayaka and all these other characters are. Like, but what I am going to describe are some of the more specific characters for this OVA in particular, stuff that I never really took the time to actually explain in the first episode when we talked about Mazinger overall. And we can definitely mention, you know, if we have Great Mazinger in this OVA, that obviously means we have Tetsuya Tsurugi, who is Great Mazinger's pilot. Another case as well, much like with Great Mazinger, that like his character origin is like a lot different. He's no longer, because there's no Kenzo Kabuto, he's just a dude that got hired by the Photon Power Labs to be like, hey, we built this big super robot that we need like an ace pilot in order to handle. Can you do it? And he's like, hell yeah, sign me up. Also, can you bring my girlfriend along to help? Thanks.
Yeah, this is not the Tetsuya with daddy issues. This is just cool Tetsuya, I guess.
Yeah, cool Tetsuya. He does have a bit of like a rapport with Koji, a bit of a rivalry, but not to the point where he is like feeling any sort of inferiority complex or worried that he is going to like be replaced at any point.
Yeah.
He knows full well it's like, yeah, no, he's one of the team.
Yeah.
Him, Koji, Sayaka, Boss, especially Boss. He should be honored to be on Boss's team.
Boss.
And I also mentioned his girlfriend. Yes, Jun Hono is also in this OVA as well. Really only for about the same amount of time that Tetsuya is present. But like she helps out like in the Photon Power Labs providing like support, when they're in battle. Probably like the most often example being whenever she sends in the Great Booster to help out Tetsuya. And this is something that I've mentioned as much with briefly going over like the general idea of Great Mazinger, as far as like the manga and anime, is that yes, Jun is a mixed race character, but much like how Tetsuya does not have his daddy issues in this OVA, they do not do any dwelling or implication about like the racial prejudice she faced growing up. She's just there. She's the cool big sis of the team, really.
Yeah, with 7 episodes, there's really not much time to dwell on that anyways.
No. At least when it comes to the finale, as you'll find, like, Tetsuya and Jun make sure to still come back for the very end, and they get some good moments.
Yeah.
And last, for the characters that I did not mention before in the overview, but I have reason to mention them in this OVA, are Lori and Roll, a pair of blonde twins. These are actually characters that originated specifically like in the original Mazinger Z manga, and in the case of like this OVA, as opposed to how they were in the original where they were extras that eventually kind of like piloted like their own super robot, like 2 pilots at once, I'll probably give you an opportunity to guess like where the cockpit was situated on that robot in order to facilitate 2 pilots, especially when they're blonde girls.
Yeah.
Look, this is going to guy we're talking about. Is it any fucking surprise?
Listen, there is art of them. There is official art of them in just very skippy bikinis. That's all you need to know about that. About these characters.
Yep. Yeah, and that carries over to the OVA, in which they are introduced initially to create opportunities for fan service, because this is the early 2000s. Yeah. Sayaka was not happy with Koji, to say the least.
No, she was not at all.
We're not talking about episode 4 in our spoiler discussion, but just let it be known, that episode's a certain level of insanity.
It sure is. So why do we recommend this? Why should people watch Mazinkaiser arc?
That is a very good question to answer. While this is an OVA, a short one, and like the episodes themselves, they may seem like they're vignettes of what could be a much larger, long-running story. Typically the thing that I often bring up is like the unfortunate drawback to a lot of OVAs, but even with that, this OVA is gorgeous to watch.
Oh, yeah.
Especially as far as anime that came out in the early 2000s go, because this is important to remind people for context, especially for, like younger listeners that might not have gone back to watch any anime from before the 21st century came around. But like at this point in 2001, we would be in the era of early digital anime, and like the jank that was often associated with it in terms of like how it looked. But like by comparison, Mazinkaiser comes out looking pristine because you watch it and it is very clearly the last of its kind. Like as a work produced with traditional cell animation, it has all the hallmarks of how you remember anime from the 90s looking.
Yeah, just the way everything is shaded and looks, and even like the way things move, it just looks really nice, and it doesn't feel like a lot of corners have been cut with it.
No, which is very impressive considering like the whole like 1 year turnaround to get all 7 episodes out.
Yeah.
Like it is very impressive that like it manages to keep up the look that it commits to throughout the whole thing. Like, and the other part as far as why I recommend it kind of gets back to what we had described with like in our prehistory section, is like there is historical significance behind this being the first Mazinger anime of any kind, like since the 70s, and just the start of, if not the explicit start of Dynamic Pro modern adaptations, but definitely I think like the best showing of it yet, because there are people out there that would like Get a Robo Armageddon. I'm kind of mad on it. I know you are as well.
Yeah.
We have our specific kind of critiques of it. Shin Getter versus Neo Getter is better, but it's also the sort of thing where it feels very like, it is an OVA that feels very movie-like. Like like you're not gaining too much more by turning it into an episodic series when you could just edit it all together into a single movie.
Yeah.
Mazinkaiser, meanwhile, it's a good mix of like short story arcs that like go for 2 episodes. So basically the beginning and end. With the middle being a lot of very good, one-off episodic stories. Stuff that you would expect to see, especially one of them, one of the episodes we'll talk about that feels very much like something that Toei would have come up with in the original 70s anime.
Yeah.
So like it's just a good mix of like stories to tell that doesn't leave you wanting too much, just the sort of lingering thought of, man, I wish this was a full series, which, that would be awesome if it did. But it would probably also contribute to corners being cut eventually in terms of like animation quality, just to meet those deadlines.
Like you've mentioned Shin Getter before, like the thing I always feel about that is that it is a very ambitious OVA that had ended up being a little crushed by some of that ambition. Like Mazinkaiser is, actually, I'd say it's a lot less ambitious in a way, but it's more like it's trying to capture the feel of the old show in a way. It's not trying to make like, oh, this is a darker, more subversive version like Shin Getter was. This is just, no, we're just doing those old Gona guy stories.
Yeah, and by Shin, I believe you mean like Get a Robo Armageddon.
Yeah, I mean Get a Robo Armageddon. Yeah.
That's the thing I was needing to like double check and make sure, because you're right. Like it is definitely a lot more focused and pared down in Mazinkaiser. Like the stuff that they choose to pull inspiration from is like well within the bounds of what they're able to do. Like there are chapters, like there are episodes in the middle, 3 and 4 in particular, where they are straight up taking like story concepts that were well known in the original manga,
Yeah.
So you've got that aspect with like its structure, the historical significance. We've mentioned as much that the music is absolutely outstanding. Both the opening, the ending, and insert songs deserve those praises.
I'll need to listen.
Even to the point where it's like it's outside of the scope of what we're going to talk about, admittedly, because it's in the movie. But the movie also has some fucking fantastic Jam Project themes in there as well.
Yeah.
Like look up Majin Kenzan when you have the time, and that is the one where it starts to feel like it's getting closer and closer to what you associate with like the typical Jam Project style of music.
Yeah.
And as a miscellaneous point in Mazinkaiser's favor, this is the one Mazinger anime that gives Boss and Boss Boro the most love. It'll make sense by the end.
It feels like there's someone on the team, somebody who is just a huge Boss fan, and they're like, no, we gotta make him the most important guy, and God bless.
And I salute them, good sir. Like those are all really strong points in Mazinkaiser's favor. Like, and it's funny too, where it's like this kind of gets into, I guess, if you want to talk about like the matter of considering things as objective best versus subjective best. By this point, we have already talked about 2 Mazinger related OVAs.
Yeah.
This is the one where I think it is like the clear winner on just an objective quality. But god damn it, if I would be lying if I didn't say that I personally love Skull more.
I can see why. I feel like Mazinkaiser as a show edges it out a little more to me.
Definitely. So with all that recommendation, all those points being made about why you should watch it, gotta obviously figure out the next step, where can you get it? So at least like most Mazinger anime, the OVA can at least be had in physical form with Blu-rays. They're currently licensed by Discotech Media, so for all you appreciators of physical media, you're definitely covered on that front. And even if you want to go older, like if you want to just because you're some weird like physical hipster that needs to have like all the old distribution releases, there was like an ADV release back in the day which had its own dub, although I think that dub might have been included in the Discotech Media release, considering ADV technically no longer exists anyway. That's there if you're curious. But as far as streaming options, it's a bit trickier trying to actually find those, I found.
It's not as available on streaming.
No, definitely not. Like not even an option. I don't think I even saw an option to like purchase or rent it through like Prime Video or anything like that. It's definitely the sort of thing where it's like, I think just because of the legacy of it being like an old anime, it kind of makes sense that Discotek would have the current physical media rights, because that's probably the audience they're expecting to sell it to the most. That said, though, the OVA has been fan translated for like the longest time, and it's still watchable aside from like the occasional spelling and grammatical mistakes that might pop up. But it's far from like, from having rewatched that particular, you know, translation, is like, it's not so horribly stiff or botched in some areas that it's like unwatchable. You can still get through it, but just know full well that like this was early enough that I think like the people that were translating it did not seem to clue into the fact that powder is pronounced with a P.
Yeah, which is okay. Oh, sure.
Yeah, that was the one thing that stuck out to me, like kind of like a sore thumb. Basically, the point we're getting at is that like, if you don't want to go the physical route, as far as digital solutions, best options to sail the high seas, as we always say.
And if you do want to go the physical route, just to support Disco and Tech Media, they do some good stuff.
They're just always putting out like announcements and shit of like classic anime that they are bringing over that is well deserving of that distribution.
Yeah, they keep releasing like old mecha shows, and every time they announce them, I'm like, holy shit, you're releasing that? You're releasing Gravion? What?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is especially a wow, as in why?
I don't know. Oh, no, wait, sorry, not Gravion. I was thinking of another show. Whoops.
Oh wait, are you talking about like?
Fuck. I mean,
there are so many giant robot animes that start with the letter G. You people at home have no fucking idea.
There are so many that you got no idea. No, Baldios. I was thinking of Baldios. I don't know why I mixed that up with fucking Gravion.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a deep pull right there.
Like, who the fuck remembers Baldios except for like us?
And we've also mentioned as much that like the OVA had a follow-up movie. The name of it is especially amusing, particularly if you are familiar with Mazinger's overall history, because stop me if this sounds familiar to you. It's called Mazinkaiser versus the Great General of Darkness.
I wonder why it's called that.
It's not discussed in this episode for obvious reasons, because like it is a movie. It is like it is the length of multiple episodes combined. But I would say it goes without saying, if you watch Mazinkaiser and you come away enjoying it, then the movie is worth it as a follow-up. Significantly harder to get a hold of naturally, be it for the same reasons we described with the whole like difference between getting it physical versus, you know, just finding it digitally through you know, legal acquisition means, quote unquote. But it is, you know, as it is very much playing off of the title of the 70s movie, Mazinger Z versus the Great General of Darkness, it is naturally a much darker type of story. It's a lot more dire, the stakes that are in play, but that just leads to a much greater payoff when Mazinkaiser prevails.
Oh yeah, there's good catharsis there. When you watch Mazinkaiser, the series itself, you know, oh yeah, this isn't, the actual show is pretty light in tone, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of goofy hijinks that they like to indulge in.
Especially episode 4.
And 5, which we'll get to. Yeah, Mazinkaiser is great. Like always, if you are sold on what we have talked about, then turn off this episode and go watch it immediately, because everything we're about to talk about next is all spoiler town.
It's all spoilers from here, and it's only 7 episodes. You can get through it quickly.
It's 7 episodes, but as that is like a episode count that has too much content for us to fit into the time span of our usual podcasting kind of recording sessions, that does mean that we have picked out a very specific episodes that we want to show as like highlights, what we find stands out the strongest out of this short mini series. So, see you on the other side as we talk about episode 5 and 7 of Mazinkaiser.
Let's go.
Man, being Baron Ashura is suffering.
They just suffer for this entire OVA series, especially this episode. Oh my god.
At least when you start an episode of Mazinkaiser, you know you're gonna get blasted like first thing first with like that opening.
Fire Wars is such a banger. Like, I fucking never skip that. I never skip that opening ever.
Same. I mean, like I generally do not skip openings whatsoever, mostly because like when I have like my downloaded versions of like episodes for other shows, it's kind of a crapshoot whether or not the person that put it together decided to encode chapters. So it's like I don't want to scrub through it and possibly like skip past like the first 5 seconds of the actual episode. So I just kind of like stick with the opening. At least it's worth it in Mazinkaiser's case.
It absolutely is.
But yes, we're not kidding when we say being Baron Ashura is suffering, because by this point in the OVA, you know, after the initial story arc and various, you know, like self-contained episodes, it very much seems like Dr. Hell has had enough of Ashura's shit because they cannot find him anywhere. He is nowhere to be found on Bardo's Island.
It seems like they kind of got abandoned by Dr. Hell at this point. They just said, actually, just fuck you both. Fuck you, Baron Ashura.
Yeah. It is suffering when Dr. Hell abandons you and when you're about to subject yourself to the plot of the episode, because Ashura has come up with another devious plan to try and defeat Mazinkaiser and hopefully win back Dr. Hell's favor. This begins the plan to assume Dr. Yumi's identity on his birthday, no less.
His birthday.
Oh, you've no idea what hell awaits you.
No. Why did you even think this was a good plan in the first place?
Do at least a bit more reconnaissance. Do at least a bit more studying on who you're going to like imitate. But yeah, it's the whole setup is Ashura and like a contingent of their Iron Mask army just catching Yumi off guard as like as Roll is Lori or Roll. Again, I forget. One of the twins is driving them back. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're fucking blonde bombshells. Like, you need to remember them more. I don't even remember the names of the 3 professors.
I just know. Yeah, I don't know any of them. I don't know either.
It's just they're always together, and they also take part in the shenanigans that'll take place in this episode.
Pretty much.
But yeah, they catch Yumi and one of the twins off guard, causing their car to careen off the cliff. They crash, which gives Ashura like the perfect opportunity to just roll up, driving the car itself, not being chaperoned in it, disguised as Professor Yumi, and you can instantly tell when he steps out of the car that there's the glare on the glasses that is like the biggest giveaway immediately that like, oh yeah, this is not Professor Yumi.
Even their mannerisms and the way they move is just so cartoonish as well.
Yeah, and again, like we said, he decided to enact this plan without realizing that this was the professor's birthday. It's so amusing how poor Ashura is at acting like the professor that you would have thought that any of these other characters should be smart enough to instantly figure out something is up.
Yeah, like he is constantly freaking out this entire time and nobody stops and to ask like, Professor Yumi, are you okay? They're just kind of fucking blind to whatever's going on with them.
I think it's only like the other twin is the first to like notice something is wrong, but doesn't act on it because it's like, weird, my sister's not with you. What's wrong?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, she had work at the office. What office? But whatever. I guess when you get dragged into your own birthday party and forced to wear a Waluigi nose and mustache, I guess that making you look the fool at your own party helps as like a cover.
Also, Sayaka, why did you think giving your dad a half purple, half blue or black shirt that was a good idea? What were you thinking?
Yeah, just the amount of stuff that gets thrown at this party, you very quickly realize is all about dunking on Baron Ashura.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things where it's dunking on them with the idea of like, they're not here, so it's like this is just a funny talking behind their backs kind of thing, not realizing that the actual Ashura is there and having like a crisis of identity to the point where it's like, if these characters were smarter, you would think that the plans for the party were changed to be like this because they just wanted to cause him to melt down and blow his cover. Yeah, but no, turns out it's just one hell of a coincidence.
This feels like I could see this episode happening in the old 70s show.
I felt the exact same way when watching it, absolutely. Like there's all kinds of other crazy plots and shit that happens involving Ashura where they clearly end up getting in over their head.
Yeah.
I think one of the many various domestic spats that Koji and Sayaka end up having because some of their arguments get like shockingly violent for a 70s anime are ones where like I remember one of the arguments they get into are constantly them like Ashura's just catching strays even though they aren't there in person. They're just spying on them through like a wiretap because it's like, how cruel, you destroyed my trophy.
Oh my god.
Even Ashura wouldn't go that far. And it's just making them like super uncomfortable because it's like I thought I would spy on them to get crucial information about Mazinger. I didn't expect to get like this shit. I didn't sign up for this. Ugh. You know what we also didn't sign up for?
What?
Naked Baron Ashura shower scene. Oh God, why?
What?
And the skin suit with a zipper.
Also, why did they make them so caked up? We do get a naked ass shot of Baron Ashura if you ever wanted to see their bare ass.
Oh, you get to see both of their cheeks.
But it's like
it's like I guess people in the Mikane Empire were just built different 2,000 years ago. I guess that's the only explanation.
Yeah, and I guess like someone heard that you gotta have a shower scene in like OVAs, and they were like, "Bet, here's your shower scene, fuckers."
I feel that is the best way to actually take advantage of, like, if someone is hitting you with, like, kind of like the bullshit by committee mandates of you gotta have this in your anime, like, more power to you to just take that idea and to corrupt it indefinitely.
They sure did here.
That said, though, it's still pretty terrifying to behold all the same, so maybe they did too good of a job.
A little too good.
But yes, by this point, the heroes do start to suspect things because one of the twins finally speaks up about the fact that Yumi's been acting way too strangely ever since getting back to the labs.
And we do kind of get a cut to like the goons searching for Dr. Yumi as he's like hiding from them and trying to sneak away them while he's all hurt and stuff.
Yeah, it's a very unfun situation for him at the moment because like he's having to hide like in a forest. It's already nighttime, so like it is especially tense with like the decreased visibility on all fronts. That said though, back in the labs, Ashura is still not going to be deterred in their goal of getting into Mazinkaiser's like hangar and sabotaging it. And this leads to intimidating their way past the security guards who look very thuggish already. They look exactly like they were probably delinquents from Boss's gang that got hired, and not the cronies Nuke and Mucha. No, it's not them. It's more like they look like thugs, which is like, okay, I wouldn't expect Yumi to like go that far, but I guess you kind of have to if you're like in a constant battle against a villain literally named Dr. Hell. Yeah. But I do love during this scene, I made a specific note about it because I think it was very specific to me, is how once Yumi Ashura intimidates their way past the guards, where it's like, what reason? Do I need a reason to go wherever the hell I want in this lab? And like as he's on the other side, he's got this shit-eating, mouth-open grin, eyes forward, and then eyes like, shifting to his periphery as he goes, ha! Morons.
It's such a great expression.
It's good reaction material, I think. If I had a Discord server, I would make that a fucking sticker.
Oh, it'd be a great sticker. It's such a good expression.
But yes, Yumi Ashura's plan, ultimately, sneak into the hangar where Mazinkaiser is and the reactor, the photon reactor, set bomb charges, get outside of the labs, activate the bombs, completely blow up the photon power labs from within. Brilliant. Sure, it would have been good if you were able to find Dr. Hell and get approval for this plan, because A, he might tell you, no, today's a bad time, or B, I have something else planned, fuck off.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of, I think it's important to note, because we didn't mention this in the first half, there is no Count Brocken in this OVA.
Oh, right. I completely forgot about him. Yeah, he is nowhere to be seen.
It's so weird not having, General Number 2 to try and, like, give any extra antagonism towards Ashura and their failures. I guess the way that the OVA frames it whenever they cut to Bardo's Island and Ashura is begging for forgiveness, I guess it's like, yeah, Dr. Hell chiding them is already enough.
Yeah, I guess they just want to focus on Baron Ashura as the main villain, or the second to main villain, because they do kind of end up being like the big final boss.
And like kind of like I think the first genuine signs of like trying to treat Ashura as a tragic character. As much as you're able to delve into it in a 7-episode miniseries. Yeah. But you really still feel some of the pathos. And at least Ashura, at this moment, does come very close to succeeding on their plan until Koji makes a grand entrance lit by a spotlight, right? As, like, he's about to press the button. It's like showing up like he's fucking Batman or some shit.
Also, before this, we get to see a scene where Yumi gets caught by the goons and he's almost, like, pushed off a cliff. But then one of the sisters shows up at a helicopter and saves him.
all the characters are converging at just the right points to like stop this horrible plan from taking place. Like even as like the tension is still rising because, you know, the bombs are still set and like Ashura could press the button at any times, even though everyone already knows, especially the viewers at home, that is not Professor Yumi, they still gotta have the slow uncostuming as Ashura undoes the zipper and takes off the skin suit. It's like, I get it. It's the dramatics that count most.
Yeah. Because, sure, you get to have your own drama moment, I guess, even though everyone kind of guessed it already. Not the characters, anyways.
Yeah, they knew it was one of Dr. Hell's goons. They just didn't think that Ashura would be this desperate to do something like this.
Yeah.
But never mind that. Boss to the rescue! Fuck yeah, you're the greatest hero of all time, boss!
This is what we mean when we say someone on the team must really like Boss, because Boss just shows up, here's the fucking bombs, and just tosses them right at Ashura.
Yep, with the help of a little robot that was designed by the three professors and part of the festivities at the party. It was actually the thing that ended up being like the thing that like made Ashura bow out of the party completely out of emotional duress. Mm-hmm. It's real good, boss. Like this episode and like pretty much the final story arc are his finest hour.
By far, yeah.
So much good shit, all this nonsense, all these last-minute heroics that somehow the actual giant robot fight of this episode, Mazinkaiser versus Taurus D7, is not the most exciting part.
No, it kind of ends in an anticlimax, actually.
Very deliberately so, because it hits you with like kind of the realization of like, oh yeah, this is what Dr. Hell has been up to. Because there you also had like a moment earlier like on Bardos Island where he's ordering like a group of Iron Mask soldiers to keep digging deeper into like the center of the island, just trying to find anything else that he can get to like turn the tides against Mazinkaiser, like a mechanical beast that's stronger than anything he currently has in his arsenal. And I guess he found it.
Which we won't see until the next episode.
Yeah, but I guess spoilers, it's like a weird plant parasite thing.
Yeah.
It's used as another. It leads to the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, Ashura could have avoided this humiliation if they just waited, because Dr. Hell's plan is basically the same thing of infiltrating the labs from within, but it works a lot better.
Yeah.
But at least the fight does have theme of Mazinkaiser playing when it's happening, which is always a good time when it happens. Like I think there's almost no episode in this OVA where they don't get some use out of that theme.
Yeah, it's been such a long while since I've watched this OVA. For some reason, I thought theme of Mazinkaiser only played in the final episode. I forgot it played all the time.
Like, I even think it plays as far back as, you know, when the actual Mazinkaiser is, like, introduced in full and, like, you see it more in action with episode 2.
Yeah.
That was fun. Like, and if it's any, like, if you might be wondering, because of the fact that, like, with these highlight discussions, we typically focus on 2 episodes, barring some instances where we might focus on a specific story arc, in which case it might go as long as 3. But with these 2 specific episodes, I think it should be very clear that I was the one that chose this one and was very adamant about wanting to talk about it.
So why this?
Because if there's one thing I like in giant robot anime, it's not just having really cool robot action, is when you just get some ridiculous shit. Ashura's plan is definitely one of the most ridiculous and humiliating for them yet.
Also, it's even funnier because this is an OVA. They're using their limited amount of episode time and budget on a hijinks episode.
Yes, and it's a hijinks one that will, like, depending on your sensibilities, not leave you feeling gross like episode 4, where it's basically the beach episode. Granted, I did rewatch that episode on my own time, and I still laugh at it, but I know full well that I'm an awful, awful person.
Man, Go Nagai has some sensibilities that are, I don't know how much they've aged. Well, if they've aged well or not.
I don't know, but I don't want him to change. I just want him to, like, keep staying the same and, like, not have a horrible, tragic death at any point. Like, keep living as long as your natural lifespan will allow you, please.
We want our uncle to keep living a good life.
Absolutely. And when it comes to these episodes as well, as you would expect, because they know how many episodes they have and what they're working on at a time, you obviously got to have your next episode preview, which means episode 6, which we won't talk about in full. has the absolutely amazing title, Koji Kabuto Dies in Magma. To which Koji replies in the next episode preview, "What? There's no way they can kill me?" Well, good news, Koji. They can't.
I feel like that's just a jab at like episode titles being main character is going to die horribly. It just happens a lot in shows.
Yeah, or also I guess like episode titles that just outright spoil what the actual outcome is going to be.
Wait, is this the original clickbait?
I think it might.
Oh my God.
Like, if the 70s didn't have an episode title like this, then this OVA, I think, might be the first one where it was genuinely used as like, oh yeah, we're just going to use an episode title that is a straight fucking lie.
Yeah, I'm sure if you go back, you'd find at least like a couple that are just lies like this one.
Yeah, something like that. But that leads us into our very brief recap of what happens in episode 6 going into episode 7, a decisive battle, Flaming Hell Castle. Which, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, episode 5 does have a title. It's A Narrow Escape, the Photon Power Lab. Not quite as memorable as Koji Kabuto Dies in Magma, but nothing can, really. Yeah. Because as episode 6 shows, he does, in fact, not die in magma. In fact, Dr. Hell engages in a plan in which, like, a plant-based parasite from one of the Kikaiju implants itself in Sayaka's robot, Venus A, so that it activates Venus A, turns it into a robot on the enemy side, absolutely wrecks the Photon Power Lab. All the heroes are rounded up and about to be executed. Well, not before having to watch the labs get destroyed to the very end. But Boss is still fighting during that episode, and that is his actual greatest moment of heroism right there, where he comes back with Boss Boro, does the Boron hip attack, misses, but it's still okay because it goes into the reflecting pool and in front of the labs. It just splashes all of the Iron Mask goons and distracts them long enough for Koji and the others to gain the upper hand. Just, we fucking love you, boss. You are the real hero. You are the hero that makes the actual heroes of this show.
We love you, boss. This is a boss appreciation zone.
Also, during the entirety of like what happened after episode 5 is that because of Ashura going off on his own, he gets imprisoned by Dr. Hell in like in the castle dungeon. And the time you see him again at the start of episode 7, they've lost it. Only Baron Ashura could terrify someone to the point that the prison guard is the one that feels trapped.
Yeah, like it just fucking takes the gun and just goes like, yeah, you want to shoot? Come on, do it, just shoot me now. Do it, pussy.
Shoot me, you coward.
It's completely unhinged.
I mean, like, they've lost their original way of life because they used to be two people now fused in the middle and programmed to be Dr. Hell's simp till the end of time.
And boy, do they just keep simping for him even now after all this time.
Oh, yeah. You would think with like them being pushed to the breaking point like this that you would assume that this leads to like a moment of betrayal. But no, it's not. They're just that desperate to prove themselves again. But yes, the episode starts with that, and Koji, like, passed out in Mazinkaiser as it is sinking into Mount Fuji, which it was dropped into by a whole horde of Kikaiju. That's how much effort it took. They didn't need, like, they knew luring Mazinkaiser in there was not going to work, so they had to just drop the fucker in there.
Just toss him in. I guess that's good enough.
It's still the sort of thing where, like, you see it a lot with, like, the previous episode, but in episode 7, you still see it a lot that the OVA knows how to lay on, like, the sense of despair just long enough that they ease off before it becomes too suffocating.
Yeah.
Because guess who comes back?
It's right, it's Tetsuya, it's Great Mazinger. They come back for the final episode. They have been gone for most of the OVA.
At least the entrance that he makes is just Great Mazinger as fuck.
Yeah.
It is like the thing you expect, watching it like hovering in the dark sky as clouds part and thunder is like in the background, considering that this is the Mazinger that incorporated lightning as a critical part of its attack repertoire. You know, it has fucking thunder break. That's where it comes from. Like, it's great to see him back. June as well, coming in to like save a lot of the other Photon Power Lab staff as they're trying to escape from the Iron Mask soldiers. And apparently, like, as you find, she was helping out a lot of the other remaining staff when they were off screen, you know? getting them to, surprise, surprise, the secret underground lab that Mazinkaiser was stored in, because this is where you get some much important details about, A, what Tetsuya and Jun were doing after they had to bow out of the OVA, and B, what else was Juzo hiding from everyone else.
Yeah, it turns out it's a lot. This is where we get like a closest thing to a lore dump, I guess.
Yeah, the lore dump of basically Juzo had actually already made the real Grave Mazinger and had it hidden away. Like the one that the Photon Power Labs made based on blueprints left behind was like not Great Mazinger at its full capacity. Yeah. But more importantly, it makes sense. There's always got to be this moment, I think, with any Mazinger. It always starts out with like the same sort of silhouette that you expect and its capabilities, highlighting that it is a ground-based robot. You got to wait a little while until you can give a Mazinger its wings, and I guess Mazinkaiser decided the best time was to wait for the finale.
Literally the moment where Koji's at his worst.
And he needs it the most. The Kaiser Scrander, we said as much in the non-spoiler section, it is the coolest Scrander of the whole franchise.
Oh, it's so cool. Just the fucking giant devil wings.
The devil wings with like the smaller set of wings that like when you see it in frame, it's like it has like a big like X-shaped wings attached to it. Like, it's real cool. So they send it to Kaiser to get it out of Mount Fuji, and a lesser OVA would probably have it be something like, okay, now I got my wings. I can fly out of here, go straight up out of the volcano. No, fuck that. Like, Kaiser has sunk so deep into the magma already that the only way out is to just burst out the side of Mount Fuji.
Literally just
fuck that mountain.
Most over-the-top way you can handle a situation.
And again, we know how Mazinkaiser is invincible. Koji was not cooked alive in there. He was just he was just passed out from the stress. Yeah, really.
He's fine. He's fine after all that.
Yeah, and Baron Ashura, as we mentioned before, it's around this point that like, yeah, he got out of his cell not to betray Dr. Hell, but like. I keep realizing that I keep fucking up the pronouns. I'm sorry, but like I'm hoping that like I'm able to fix it enough in editing. But they are showing that they want to prove their worth one last time in the most desperate way possible.
Yeah, even after all this time, they're like, please let me sit for you. I want to be important to you, Dr. Hell. This is all we got.
And then Dr. Hell just like sits there pondering and goes, you ever thought about being a giant robot?
I mean, all the time, actually, but anyways.
I've always been thinking, especially recently, about how sick it would be if we could get, like, a Magical Girl mecha crossover where the Magical Girl transformation turns you into the robot.
How has nobody done that yet?
How has no one done Magical Girl mecha anything, really? I guess unless you count Ray Earth, but even then, that's a very small capacity.
I guess, I mean, Symphogear is like the closest we're gonna get to that.
Yeah, but it's also it's literally like a triple Venn diagram of like mecha, Maho Shoujo, and Tokusatsu.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a very special, wonderful creation that it is.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, but Dr. Hell's planning, his final trump card that is going to use Baron Ashura at the center of it. Kaiser and Great are fighting, Koji, Tetsuya, Battle Bros together again, taking out all these Kikaiju, but something even worse is on the horizon because as part of Dr. Hell's final plan, Bardos is an artificial island and it's moving.
Yep.
Like I mentioned during how like, episode 5 had like a fantastic fucking like expression on like Yumi Ashura when he like gets past those security guards that kind of sticks out with me in a very specific way. Episode 7 has one in terms of like small animation touches when like Koji and Tetsuya are bickering at each other as far as like who's going to go to Bardos Island and who's going to mop up the remaining mechanical beasts. And it's like you can feel like they're bickering being represented in how they're moving both of their Majins, that it's like that they make them look like they're fucking delinquents just like getting in each other's face.
It's really good, like small animation touches.
It is definitely the case where if you're doing a super robot anime, it pays to have those kind of little touches because that subgenre thrives on the exaggeration that is inherent to it. Whereas like if you had Gundams, if you had like Zaku's acting that way towards each other in a Gundam show, that would be like the most out of place, tone deaf fucking thing imaginable.
It's definitely depends on the tone of the show and what they're going for, but a show like this, it definitely pays to have the robots be as expressive as the characters.
Definitely. They are literally the extension of their pilots, and in fact in some cases the robots are their pilots. So with that little bickering out of the way, they don't hate each other. They just know that that they understand what needs to be done. Kaiser's going to go to Bardos Island to face Dr. Hell head on while Great mops up the remains of his forces. And this is where we get the real draw of the episode.
Yeah.
You know, like if episode 5's robot fight was a deliberate anti-climax, this is very much, no, this is the climax. Mazinkaiser versus Hell King Gordon, which doubles as a final showdown with Baron Ashura because they have now been fused with Hell King Gordon itself to become the ultimate Kikaiju.
It's a giant robot, but it also happens to have Baron Ashura's face on it, which is such a weird visual. It's also got some grunts on it for some reason.
Yeah, there's a few iron masks that also, I guess, got like subjected to like the fusion process. And the thing with their faces being on there is that their faces are not suddenly enlarged to fit like, you know, a robot-sized head or beyond the chest or anything. It's like, no, it's like they're the same size as if they were a human. It's just they just got stapled to like the top of the robot's head. Hell King Gordon is a cool design though.
It is.
And it's definitely the sort of thing where like the Shin Mazinger Zero manga also ends with like this similar climax, but without the Baron Ashura being fused to it part. It's more like it's more like the case of like this is Dr. Hell actually piloting like the most powerful robot he can muster. But an important thing to note, though, Hell King Gordon fights with a sword.
Yeah.
And it is like 5 times the size of Mazinkaiser. It seems like a lopsided match when you look at it.
It kicks Kaiser's ass really hard. Like Koji barely like able to stand up to it.
It's rough, but like it also factors into the pro wrestling energy that you gotta have in all your super robot fights.
Yeah.
It's not an exciting watch if your hero can just immediately steamroll the thing. So, surprise visit from the Hermit, known as Kenzo Kabuto. They don't say it's Kenzo Kabuto, but like this is something that again ties back to the fact that I've watched Mazinger Z versus the Great General of Darkness, and I am convinced more and more that it is a very important piece of Mazinger media that anyone needs to watch. Like even if they don't watch the 92 episode anime, at least they can make time for the movie, because I recognize that Hermit design in the movie. That was Kenzo in disguise, who was trying to give like a cryptic warning to his son, like, bro, these real bad dudes are on their way, don't fight them, you will die, just trust me, a new savior will arrive. But instead it's just the visage of Kenzo in his Hermit disguise, basically giving a pep talk to Koji that like, you gotta unlock the ultimate power of Mazinkaiser. So, as if the Kaiser Scrander wasn't enough, Mazinkaiser's gotta debut the Kaiser Blade. He's got a rad as fuck sword to play with.
Yeah.
Now this is an even fight.
Now he can actually stand up. Now he's got a sick ass sword. And now that the theme of Mazinkaiser is playing. Even
the debut, the way that the sword is shown like being revealed is the sickest thing ever. It is like, you want to describe this, because you were definitely like real big on like making mention of this in the notes.
I feel like a lot of it is actually the way the music plays, because you see like you hear the beginning notes of the song while like Mazinkaiser is pulling out the sword out of his chest, and the moment he pulls it out, that's when the music starts swelling and you hear the song and the lyrics start playing, and it's just so fucking cool.
It is such a good marriage of like music buildup and visuals, and also just the fact that it's like pulling a sword out of your own chest. It's like, for fuck's sake, we're only like a few years out of like Revolutionary Girl Utena having the whole drawing the sword from like people's bosoms.
Yeah.
But at least in this case, it's like, in this case, Mazinkaiser doesn't need to pull it out of, another robot's chest or anything like that in like an act of love. It's just, no, he is pulling it from his own heart, because that is just, this sword is the representation of his burning soul.
Yeah, this is just what I got. This is, fuck you, I got a sword now, and I'm gonna kick your ass.
Yeah, and then the fight just kicks into high gear of just fantastic sword clashes. Theme of Mazinkaiser is just playing the whole time in full force, and to the point when it gets to the final blow against Hell King Gordon, even the music gets like one extra touch to it that makes it like even more impactful. And it's the straight slash down the middle, splitting both sides of Ashura and Hell King Gordon.
Yeah, and that's when like you hear the music pauses for a moment, and then the moment you see their face split up, that's when the music swells up again, and to time it with their like scream.
Yeah, it is. Rip Ashura. There was obviously going to be no way out for them after all their suffering and humiliation, but at least they went out in a kick-ass robot fight.
They sure did. Like, good for them.
Especially because in a posthumous, well, not posthumous, I guess. I'm trying to find the other word of like, I guess more of like Boss leaving Koji with a Chekhov's gun. Before dealing the final blow, Kaiser did end up like sustaining quite a heavy blow that like it actually fucks up the controls of the Kaiser powder. Just a bit that like, you know, the main control mechanism no longer works. But wait, you get a flashback to episode 6 when Boss saved everyone. He hands Koji like a rod of junk metal. Even it was like with the idea of being like, you always got to have a weapon on hand. And it's like, but I already have a gun. Oh, well, I'll hold on to it. And it turns out, yeah, he just uses it in place of the busted up control stick to like finish the fight with Mazinkaiser. And it's like, like the exterior of Kaiser may be indestructible, but that doesn't stop like the impact of forces possibly like destroying some of the internals, or at least the pilot. But yes, let it be known who the real hero of the story is. And it's the guy that the author doesn't even know the name of.
Which is so funny. Boss is always the hero in our hearts.
Even when I think about other anime that Boss is in, he gets some great moments as well in Shin Mazinger Z, the anime, but nothing I think from there sticks with me nearly as strong as the moments he gets in the final episodes of Mazinkaiser. Like, this OVA really was his finest hour.
Yeah.
So Hell King Gordon's defeated. We gotta confront Dr. Hell. And, yeah, what's that? You thought Hell King Gordon wasn't enough of a climax for you? How about the island blowing the fuck up? Also, Dr. Hell goes shirtless briefly, I think. Or maybe it's, so, okay. I know this is what you wrote because, like, I initially thought this was the case as well, but I think it might have been like a more sinister lab coat underneath that, underneath the robe.
Oh, yeah.
It's just that the lighting did not look any different from his skin. That I do not blame you for thinking that Dr. Hell just went shirtless and he is swole as fuck.
Maybe it was just like actually a lab coat this entire time, but the visual image of this buff old sight is just really funny to me.
The even better part is that, like, once you get to reading Shin Mazinger Zero, you're going to find that, like, he doesn't go shirtless, but, like, that toned quality to his body still remains.
Oh, I can't wait.
The climax, at least, the real climax of Boss not Boss, fuck. That's how much we care about him, that I supplanted him in place of Koji. Fuck, I'm leaving that in, actually.
Just, leave that in. Just keep that in. We need to.
But yes, yeah, Koji gets out of Kaiser to confront Dr. Hell on foot. It's the sort of thing where I was cruelly reminded that this did not end with like a hand-to-hand fight between the two of them, because I was really hoping that would have been the case when he took off his robe. But no, instead, Dr. Hell tries to give like a last-minute sort of like appeal to Koji, where it's like, you bested my greatest underling. Why don't you work for me? I mean, that robot of yours would make us invincible. And it's just like, bro, who do you think you're talking to?
It's a good attempt, but come on, bro.
Yeah, that's ultimately still, if I had to give a knock against this final episode, which is otherwise perfect, there needed to be a hand-to-hand fist fight between these two. There is no reason not to if you have Koji willing to step out of the Kaiser powder, put himself at his most vulnerable just to tell Dr. Hell to give it up.
I actually really wish it ended up with a Yakuza fist fight between them both, but...
Yeah, just fucking no holds barred beat down as the island is on fire and blowing up.
I mean, it still would have fit.
But it does at least end on like a very ambiguous end for Dr. Hell, where he's trying to escape on like a rocket. But with how much everything is blowing up and like his ominous, last message, it's the sort of thing where you could read it as like either he did escape Bardo's Island as it blew up and is like bide his time elsewhere hiding away, or if he actually died and he's like more than likely going to come back as the undead Grand Hell Marshal as he was in Great Mazinger, because he did technically still continue to be a threat in Great Mazinger, just as an underling of the Mikane Empire, which I guess makes sense considering what the movie is about. But alas, as the island blows up, everyone's waiting with bated breath. It is important to know these 5 key words: Koji Kabuto will never die. Even if he makes us worry at the very end.
It's just it's pretty much the perfect dramatic end for this entire OVA. It's like not that like complicated. Good won against evil. The hero is safe. The world is saved. The end.
It's just a very triumphant freeze frame as like the camera zooms in on Koji in the pile there as he's flying away with Kaiser. And it's just like, I think for me, like the beauty of that ending is how much it like perfectly cements and reminds you the legacy that not just Mazinger, but like Koji as a heroic figure has. Like much in the same way where it's like with Mazinkaiser, he very much is like a Superman figure.
Yeah.
And like we kind of all know how like traditionally Superman is like the kind of hero that is supposed to like embody a set of ideals and is like nigh unbeatable because of that. You know, like the times when he is defeated are meant to be like very rare and emotionally impactful. But it's also important to see him triumph because of what he represents. And while Koji may not be as virtuous all the time as the Clark Kent would be, he still embodies that same heroic spirit and kind of highlights why I love super robots so much, why we love this subgenre. Because it is very much, you know, some people, like, the heroes they love wear capes.
Yeah.
Ours are made of metal.
And they scream about courage or justice or just fucking beating the shit out of bad guys.
Yeah, sometimes they just love to beat the shit out of their enemies, and sometimes that's all you need.
And that's fine too.
Although it is still ultimately more heroic if you, I guess that's another thing that's interesting when you look at the OVA as a whole, especially with how short it is that you do feel like the world is saved, even though you don't get those moments that often show up, especially when you watch tokusatsu hero shows. You know, like you see it always in a Kamen Rider or Super Sentai where they have to put an emphasis on the fact that there are citizens here and you get to see like the joy in their eyes when they realize that like their day has been saved by like people that they can look up to.
Yeah.
You don't get to see that in Mazinkaiser, but with how prevalent the theme of Mazinkaiser is already and the tone that song has, it's not hard to imagine that somewhere out there in the world there are people cheering that Koji is never going to die.
Yeah, I don't think we've mentioned this, but if you listen to if you read the lyrics of Theme of Mazinkaiser, it's all about how brave Mazinkaiser is, how it's our hero, how it's going to save us, and how it's the most awesome thing in the world, which it is.
Yeah, like it is no wonder that like it is a song sung by Ichiro Mizuki. Like I could not think of a better vocalist to deliver those lyrics to the audience.
Yeah, which kind of sums up, like I said, this entire OVA, where it's just kind of as simple as it goes, but sometimes simple is good.
It's a simple that I think definitely manages to have you not wanting more in a way where you feel like it's like lacking anything. Like, again, we've said as much, you know, if this had gone like a 13-episode TV anime or something, we all still would have watched it and probably still loved it, but you also would have noticed, you know, like the corners cut compared to it being an OVA miniseries where they actually have their own schedule that they can adhere to, like, as long as necessary instead of meeting deadlines for TV broadcast. But regardless, you feel so satisfied when you get to the end of this final episode. And back to the point where it's like, just because I had the time, like, kind of near the end of last weekend, it was the sort of thing where like I didn't even just focus on rewatching these 2 episodes because of how long it was since I watched the entire OVA as a whole. I did go back through all the other episodes, and that still made, you know, the finale of episode 7 just all the sweeter, getting back to the end of that and being reminded, oh yeah, this is why this anime is one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, I can believe that.
That is Mazinkaiser in a nutshell. So much fun, like going back through like these episodes, talking about them, all the hijinks, all the action, all the drama. It embodies everything about like what you love about Mazinger in the classical sense and have it amplified for the modern generation. The only thing that I think does it even better is Shin Mazinger Z, but we'll get to that in time.
We'll get to that.
But thanks for being on this, Neff. Thanks to everyone at home for listening.
Thank you for having me.
As always, we have not figured out yet what our next episode is. We cannot announce that, so look forward to that surprise next week.
And we'll see you all later.
激しさのよう